Welcome back, everybody, to What Really Matters. I'm Tablet Deputy Editor Jeremy Stern with you in Los Angeles. I'm here, as always, with Walter Russell Mead, Tablet news writer, Global View columnist at The Wall Street Journal, and Distinguished Fellow at Hudson. Let's start with this week's news. First story of the week. The Federal Reserve cut its benchmark interest rate by 0.5 percentage point on Wednesday and signaled more reductions would follow, launching its first easing cycle since the onset of the pandemic. The bumper half-point cut suggests the U.S. Central Bank is seeking to preempt any weakening of the U.S. economy and labor market, according to the Financial Times, after more than a year of holding rates at their highest level since 2001. The last time the Fed cut rates by more than 0.25 point was when COVID-19 tore across the global economy in 2020. Walter, is this news or faux news?
I think it's kind of faux news in the sense that everybody knew a cut was coming. And, just listening to your lead in there, biggest cut in 5 years. Oh, my God. I can feel the foundations of civilization shaking. Really? In 5 years? So this was kind of baked into the cake and could have been 0.25 point, could have been 0.5 as it was. And they've been saying, it's been clear to anybody who follows the economic news that the outlook is for more loosening going forward unless something changes. I'm sure it's cheering folks up in the Harris campaign, but probably shouldn't cheer up too much in the sense that, generally speaking, voters are not focused right now on sort of small changes in the economic conditions. So probably not a big political event either.
Speaking of that, though, Trump, of course, wasted no time claiming the cut was either a sign the economy is, quote, very bad, or else that the Fed is playing politics. Maybe not a surprise coming out of Trump's mouth, but what do you think? Do you think he'll be effective in framing this as some sort of election interference, for lack of a better term?
Shock again, just another shocker, Jeremy. You're coming at me one after another with these things today. Opposition politician denounces move that favors other side. My goodness. Will wonders never cease? Will that mad demagogue never rein his demons in? This I think is a play that any politician would do. Trump is doing it in his own inimitable way, but again, faux news all the way to the bank.
All right, our second story, perhaps a bit more novel. A wave of explosions ripped across Lebanon on Wednesday, appearing to mainly target handheld radios used by members of Hezbollah, one day after thousands were wounded when their pagers spontaneously exploded in a coordinated attack widely blamed on Israel after months of cross-border fire. Hundreds of Hezbollah members were killed and thousands injured in the two waves of explosions, which were also reported taking place in people's phones, solar energy systems, and fingerprint reading devices used by the militant group. Speaking in Cairo, Secretary of State Antony Blinken voiced his frustration with the attacks, emphasizing that they risked undermining efforts to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and vowed the United States had no advanced knowledge or involvement in the blasts. Walter, news or faux news?
Well, it's kind of new. This one is news all the way around. News that this is really one of the most spectacular attacks even the Israelis have pulled off in their long adventures. It's news maybe more profoundly because it means that war has changed. Once one side has done something, then it's on the table. And this means, has a lot of implications. One of them is that we probably don't want to be buying a lot of electronic components from China. Just wild thought here. And we need to maybe take a much harder look at auditing our infrastructure for security, not to mention your iPhone. So we're in a new age. It in some ways is not a very nice age. I don't blame the Israelis for taking advantage of this technology. It was there. It seems to me to be a perfectly legitimate device, and they targeted it reasonably well. So all of that makes sense, but it does illustrate that the world is a little bit more dangerous this week than it was last week, and it suggests that there will be more like this to come in other conflicts. We have that. And then I think what we have is Secretary Blinken's really poorly judged, in my view, remarks. Whatever happened to being silent? It looks it looks petulant to say, well, this just makes it harder for me to get a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. I don't want to point out the obvious here, but he hasn't been having any success in almost a year of getting a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And there were no periodic Israeli attacks on Hezbollah cell phones and pagers during all those other months. They're really not related. But even if they were, as a diplomat, is it really wise to be talking to people about how difficult my task is and so on? It's kind of defensive. And then this notion of saying, oh, and America had nothing to do with it, suggests he's afraid that if he doesn't somehow separate us from this, something terrible will happen. There's no point in that. I would say those kinds of comments actually make it harder, less likely that we're going to get a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Not that we are very likely of getting one of those right away, but because it makes the United States sort of look timorous and weak, which makes the Israelis feel a little bit more skeptical about the administration's position, but it also makes the Arabs feel a little bit more content for an administration that is constantly on the apology train. Just don't say, sometimes, diplomacy, the best diplomacy is just a little smile and perhaps offer a cookie, cup of tea.
Just one kind of abstract follow-up question, but the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years have seen just a kind of a stunning string of achievements for Israel's intelligence and covert capabilities. Stuxnet, the Iranian nuclear archive, the recent Hania assassination, these exploding pagers, many others. I guess my question is, what do you think Israel's gained strategically through all this incredible operational prowess? Like, how much do these James Bond-like capabilities matter for the country's position?
Yeah, less, I think, than the Israelis would like to believe. One thing to remember is that the Soviet Union pretty much won the espionage war in the Cold War. They were far better at penetrating us than we were at penetrating them. For that matter, the Cubans were better at penetrating us than we were at penetrating them. None of this really had the slightest impact on the outcome of the Cold War, the contest, because much bigger things are at work than sort of high-tech, gee whiz tricks. I think the Israelis have clearly slowed the Iranian nuclear program down, and that's a good thing. They haven't stopped it. They have created problems for Hamas and Hezbollah, but as far as I can tell, both Hamas and Hezbollah have been keeping Israeli leadership up at night with their capabilities and their threats. It is, for all of Israel's success in things like this very spectacular pager incident, we can't forget that on October 7th, they were completely blindsided by actions taken in Hamas, an area that they should have had really excellent visibility about. And more than that, as the war developed, the tunnel network was so much more extensive than the Israelis frankly dreamed. So there is, razzle dazzle spooky tricks are not a substitute for solid achievements in war. They're great, and I'd rather be on the side that has them than the side that doesn't. And you can't help but admire the sort of daring do and innovation behind them. But this is not how you win wars. And it's probably the way you sell weapon systems. And I suspect that Israel's arms industry and its other capabilities are going to be much in demand. And that is probably helpful for the Israelis in a significant way. So it may be the advantages over there.
All right, final story of the week. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed 3 bills this week to crack down on the use of artificial intelligence to create false images or videos in political ads ahead of the 2024 election. A new law set to take effect immediately makes it illegal to create and publish deepfakes related to elections 120 days before Election Day and 60 days thereafter. It also allows courts to stop distribution of the materials and impose civil penalties. Large social media platforms are also required to remove the deceptive material under a first-in-the-nation law set to be enacted next year. Newsom also signed a bill requiring political campaigns to publicly disclose if they are running ads with materials altered by AI. Walter, news or faux news?
I think it's probably faux news in the sense that, again, I'm not a lawyer, but it really sounds to me like the courts are not going to accept a lot of these laws. That whole pesky First Amendment problem really looms large when you get around elections. And so the idea that somehow the district attorney who is representing possibly an incumbent running for re-election is going to be able to shut down political statements made by the opposition. I think the courts are going to set a very high bar. And much as I think all of us in America respect the wisdom and the deep deliberations that characterize everything the legislature of California does, it's just possible there may be just a wee little bit of sloppy drafting in these very, very sweeping laws. So is this going to make a big impact on how elections are conducted? Probably not. On the other hand, where there is maybe a little bit of news here, it is obvious that we are going to be seeing new kinds of technology. By the way, as I was looking at this, I noticed smuggled in with these AI things were some things that would protect members of the Screen Actors Guilds and others from deep fake use of their images and so on. And it does strike me that possibly in California, there might be some interest group that was interested in using public excitement about deepfake and politics and so on, just to slide through a little bit of industrial protection. That's very cynical, I'll admit. So obviously, we are facing, as a society, this new thing. I am a little bit less worried that somehow these deepfakes are going to, win elections. Oh my goodness, I saw the opposing candidate strangle the Pope with his bare hands on TV, and I could never vote for a Pope strangler. Okay, that's probably not going to happen. I think people are overestimating to some degree the impact of some of these technologies. And in fact, if people are so stupid that they're going to be stampeded by fake videos, chances are they're so stupid they could be stampeded by just simple, ordinary lies, which, again, you look at the political history of this in other countries, you see sometimes it even happens before deepfakes and without deepfakes. So I think there's more than a little bit of hysteria about this. It is partly connected with the way the AI companies kind of enjoy the hype of, here's my new technology seeking angel and venture capital investors. And this technology is so powerful that if it is misused, it will destroy human civilization. Well, if a technology is that powerful, maybe I want to get in on it early. And I do notice that this immense hype about what AI is going to do has been accompanied by immense rises in the stock prices of companies involved in this. So there's a lot going on here. Probably the least important thing is a gallant effort by the California legislature to ride to the rescue of an endangered demographic process. If there is a big danger in these images, it is to intensify the public skepticism about everything. Let's not forget there are people around who have all kinds of crazy theories about 911. There are people around who don't believe in the moon landings. That was all, even without deep fake. I think I saw in the Babylon Bee, America's greatest news source, there was this story saying NASA promises next faked moon landing will have women in crew. There's so I think the AI stuff is going to feed growing skepticism about the reality. But you don't need AI to fake video. We've got fake videos. We've had fake videos before AI. My goodness. So it is getting harder. You have to become smarter to evaluate your news sources, to think through, how much can I trust this piece of information from this source? That's just part of civilization. You didn't actually need a lot of sophistication when you're sitting around chipping flints with your neighbors by the, and painting the occasional picture of a bull on the wall of your cave. You now, in this much more complex social environment that we live in, where people you don't know and don't have a history with are, constantly trying to get you to believe things and sell you things and all of this, you have to develop better skills to try to understand what's going on and make some judgments about what to believe, what not to believe. And I think efforts to try to protect us from some of this disinformation that's coming out will only slow down the process of people developing of our culture, developing the kind of cultural wisdom which would be broadly shared both by educated and non-educated people, a sense of what do you believe and what do you not believe, and how do you tell if an advertisement is I just think it's something we wrote about in Via Media in the old days, that they used to sell these little sea monkey packets to kids in the back of comic books, and there were all these wonderful pictures of the happy sea creatures, kings and tridents and all of this, and there were like little eggs that you put in the water, tiny eggs, and just barely visible brine shrimp would emerge from this. Well, you could say, let's not let anybody sell sea monkeys in comic books because that's misleading. Honestly, if kids don't, 25 cents, which I think is what they cost in the old days, that's actually considered as tuition. That's not a bad price for an important lesson. So I think we just have to get smarter. That's all.
All right, that does it for the news this week. Let's have the big conversation. So, the Wall Street Journal ran a report this week, Walter, marking a grim milestone. 1 million people are now dead or injured as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war. Also this week, China escalated a series of clashes in the South China Sea with the Philippines, which, I'll remind our listeners, has a mutual defense treaty with the United States. And on top of that, every day seems like it could potentially be the day that a much wider war ignites in the Middle East, potentially between Israel and Iran. You wrote in your column this week about what I gather you regard now as maybe the single most important issue facing America and the planet at this point, which is that the prospect of a World War III is closer than maybe ever before. You wrote of a recent report from the Commission on a National Defense Strategy that, quote, World War III is becoming more likely in the near term, and the U.S. is too weak either to prevent it or, should war come, to be confident of victory. A more devastating indictment of a failed generation of national leadership could scarcely be penned. It's hard to know where to begin with something this grave and significant, but give us a sense of what you think you see here on the horizon.
Well, first of all, what I do think is that people listening to the podcast should take a look at this report. Let's make sure we have a link up where people can see it. This commission, which is, there have been several iterations of this commission. It's a nonpartisan / bipartisan commission where you get the chairs and the ranking members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee to find people who've got security clearances and so on to really dig into the situation of the country, of our armed forces, of our strategy, of where our where adversaries or potential adversaries may be in their thinking, and to pull it all together, and particularly in view of kind of the stated goals of the national defense strategy, how it's kind of a in-depth report card. And these reports are typically issued in two ways. One, there is a classified version, which goes out to people inside the government and with security clearances. What came out last month was the public-facing version, which relies only on unclassified, only provides unclassified estimates and so on, but has, in a sense, the authority of the knowledge that these folks have of what's going on behind the screen. And it's devastating. It really does say that we are coming closer to great power war, that we're closer now than we've been since 1945, and that the armed forces of the United States are not ready for the challenges they actually are facing, that the Pentagon system of procurement and management is deeply broken, that the armed forces are both under-resourced and poorly managed, that the national leadership has failed to educate the American people, provide the American people with the information they need to see the real dangers. And there we are. It is, and I say that it's hard to imagine a more devastating indictment of a generation, because it is harder to imagine that. I've said and written before that I think on the day of judgment, Neville Chamberlain will rise up and condemn this generation of policymakers, because he was far more resolute, far more clear-sighted, and much quicker to change course than they have been. The future is going to look back on the last 15 or 20 years of American national security policy and strategy, and we are going to be the great examples of the idiots whose lead no one should follow. Whatever the Obama administration did, the Trump administration, or the Biden administration did, future folks will be thinking, how do we do the opposite? How do we not repeat these mistakes? We need, as a people, to take a hard look at where we are and where we've come, and think about how do we maybe do things a little bit differently now.
In terms of what we can do at this point, given all the erosion and the country's position and so forth, just as a matter of, kind of throwing resources at the problem, I think we spend about, 3.5% of GDP on defense. Let's say we just, made it 6 to 7%. Let's say we were able to do that, even given all the waste and inefficiency and corruption in the Pentagon acquisitions process and all that. Do you think that's kind of the number one on our priority list right now, is to just spend a lot more on defense? Do you think that takes care of a lot of the problems, or is there something else we should be focusing on?
Well, it won't take care of the problems immediately, because even if you turned the dial to full today, to full speed ahead, it's going to take a long time for those changes to be manifest. And it's also true that without the kinds of internal reforms in the Pentagon and elsewhere, we'd likely spend a lot of the money badly, in ways that not only meant that we got less bang for our buck, but that it took too long for the bangs to come. And so we need a kind of we really do need a lot of work to happen in a lot of different levels. And the reality is that for the next few years, we will be confronting grave international dangers without all of the resources and all of the capabilities that ideally you would want. Neither the report nor I are saying we would lose if this happened, but rather that we are not confident that we would prevail. We're in a gray zone. So we need to start thinking. For a long time, American foreign policy people and American military people have kind of operated from this assumption that we are the great power, we are the ones in charge, and so we should not take risks. We should be very deliberate in what we do. The President of the United States has thought of himself as the CEO of a big legacy company and a kind of a business statesman. And, we shouldn't shake things up. And that the biggest risk for our position is any kind of disorder. And I think we're going to have to move in our heads to more scrappy underdog. We're going to have to start figuring out ways where, for example, by having a stronger will to act, we can deter people when we can't deter them by the sheer large pile of things that we've got. We're going to have to become agile. We're going to have to work much more intensively with our allies, because with the help of allies, we can sometimes overcome some of these disadvantages. In the Middle East, I do think this means coordinating more closely with countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. It involves in Europe, perhaps doubling down on the more activist countries, and whether it's a Poland or a Sweden or a Finland, and maybe worrying a little bit less about some of the countries that are less forward-leaning in their stances. It certainly involves the cultivation of foreign belief in American will. Think about it. Don't like recommending Joe Stalin as a model for statecraft, but between 1945 and 1949, Stalin knew very well that the United States had bombs, nuclear weapons, and that he did not. But he showed absolutely no sign of being willing to concede a single inch on a single point out of fear that the United States might use those nuclear weapons. To some degree, he ran a bluff, and a very successful bluff. So we are going to have to maybe come back to more brinksmanship in our diplomacy, because we still do have these nuclear weapons. They still are a factor. We are going to have to look harder at ways we can be unconventional in our approach. Obviously, we can take some leaves out of the Israeli book. Those pagers are very interesting. So, and we have these skills of technological adaptability that are very much real, and we can gain and hold a lead on others there. And we can do some of this even if we don't reform the entire way the Pentagon works. In history, people often talk about the contrast between the Great Spanish Armada, these huge boats moving slowly and stately up the English Channel, confident that their numbers could crush. And then you had the sort of scrappy little English sea dogs, smaller ships fighting away and so on. America has come to think of ourselves as the Spanish Armada, and we need to maybe get back to thinking of ourselves a little bit more like Francis Drake. But we are also going to have to, the only way we can remedy our situation is to build a much deeper national public awareness of just what a dangerous world we've stumbled into, and just how hard we're going to have to work. This is not about, let's go invade people for the fun of it. This is all about preventing war, not having war. Remember, Madeleine Albright in the 90s complained to Colin Powell, what's the point of having this beautiful army if we never get to use it? No. The point of having a really beautiful army is exactly so that you don't have to use it. And we need to get back into that thinking that defense preparedness is not aggressive preparation for aggression. Defense preparedness is about maintaining, strengthening, deepening the peace, and therefore the security of the people in the United States. But we've got to get back to that thinking. I think if these other countries out there that now think they have us on the run, or that they can push us around, if they see a sea change in American public opinion, from being distracted and interested in other things to being focused on the need for protection and defense. That alone will do. Will make the world more peaceful. It will mean that whatever our presidents say about our commitments and so on will seem a lot more credible, and it will suggest that America is not a force to be trifled with. So right now, as dangerous as our as the lack of preparation and lack of investment in our armed forces is the inattention, the profound inattention to these dangers that we see in the American public. And working on this I think the most significant thing that people, whether they're in government and politics, in journalism, in daily life, talking to their friends and studying to themselves, getting Americans to see the real state of the world and to draw the conclusions from that. That is the greatest thing I think any of us could now be doing to try to protect what's left of world peace.
All right. That does it for the big conversation. Let's end on the tip of the week. Another reader request, Walter, this time from Danny in Roanoke, who wants to know, quote, who is your favorite living public intellectual?
That's a tough question. Honestly, when I forget, it was maybe in the 80s, a book came out. We didn't use that term, public intellectual. I hated that term right from the start. I still don't like it. It's possibly because when I was a kid in the UK, you'd see these signs of public convenience, which was, as British would say, a loo, or a toilet or lavatory. And so there's something about that I find unappealing. No, I just think the term is kind of, ugh. Speaking personally, there's really almost nothing I hate more than reading policy books and long documents of policy, wonk, 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 wonk. It's dull. I long for the days when sort of you had novelists who were writing things that really spoke to the deep issues of the time, so that, someone like a Jane Austen was an intellectual, or even in the later decadent years of it, a Norman Mailer. So this kind of separation between the public intellectuals and the artists and the thinkers, and so it is actually, that's one of the things that's, I think, is kind of not great about our current cultural situation. If you really put a gun to my head and say, okay, but fine. I mean, I suppose I might say, among the people I would think of would definitely be Harvey C- Mansfield at Harvard, simply because he may be the last living professor in the United States who tells his students the truth or something like it, that actually your work is kind of mediocre. And it would take a lot more skull sweat to get to something really interesting. But have a nice day. It would be nice if we had more folks willing to do that. But also, I guess I might say somebody like Ron Chernow, the historian, because his biographies, I'm thinking of his biographies of Hamilton, of Washington, of Grant, that come immediately to mind, but others too, are not just telling the story. He was born in, and he did this and he did that, but attempt to get at the great questions of the era in which this person lived, and why the ideas that they had and the actions that they undertook had the kind of consequences and resonance that they did, and what we today can learn from studying both their successes and their failures. In that sense, I think a really, really good historian can do the kinds of things that people, I think, are thinking about when they talk about public intellectuals.
All right, there you have it. Thanks to our producer, Noam Bloom. Thanks to Will Cummings at Hudson and my co-host, Walter Russell Mead. I'm Jeremy Stern. We'll see you next week. And until then, please go rate and review us. This helps other people find the show.